On the first day, the networks carried the breaking story. A single shot fired during a live rally at Utah Valley University. The victim identified as Charlie Kirk, the location, the main quad outside the Lucy Center. By mid-afternoon, law enforcement had named a suspect, Tyler Robinson, a 22-year-old seen on campus surveillance. By nightfall, media outlets repeated the same line. A long-range shot fired from the rooftop of the Lucy building. The weapon, a bolt-action 30-06 Mauser, reportedly found in nearby woods. The motive? Political. The case? Closed. But the review began immediately. Public footage was downloaded and frame rates analyzed. It was within the first few hours that Robert Morningstar's lab noted discrepancies. First, the wound trajectory. Initial video footage, slowed frame by frame, showed the victim collapsing not from a frontal strike, but from an angular path, the head jolting downward and forward, the body twisting slightly to the left. No backward fall. No recoil from a shot traveling across the quad. The body reacted as though struck from behind and above. The autopsy visuals were not yet released, but frame interpolation revealed bulging tissue forming behind the right ear, the skin distorting outward before rupture. The exit point appeared along the left side of the neck. This vector was inconsistent with the claimed sniper position on the front-facing rooftop. The angle implied an origin not from the stage front, but from a higher position off-axis, to the left and slightly behind. The suspect was seen on the roof, confirmed by multiple campus security angles. But across all footage, no rifle was visible. No long case, no shoulder strap, no barrel or stock. The backpack he carried was compact, incapable of holding a full-length bolt-action rifle. Analysis of his movement pattern revealed no time for disassembly or concealed transport. At no point was a weapon shown in his possession. The following morning, the claim of a recovered rifle emerged. Law enforcement reported a 30-06 bolt-action Mauser found in a wooded area approximately 180 yards from the main campus. The rifle was described as fully assembled and wrapped in rags. No photos were released of it being carried. No footage connected the suspect to its transport or disposal. The discovery raised new questions. Why would a suspect disassemble a rifle to ascend, then reassemble it to abandon it? Why wrap it after reassembly rather than scatter the parts? Why was it intact and left in a static location? These inconsistencies redirected the investigation. Morningstar's team overlaid the plaza layout, mapping all rooftop elevations and clear lines of fire. None matched the trajectory observed in the footage. The angle required a source much higher than any structure in the immediate vicinity. Additional review of crowd-filmed cell phone videos exposed another anomaly: the sound profile. The gunshot lacked echo. It registered as a short, flat impulse. No slapback, no reverberation from the surrounding courtyard walls. At a range of 200 yards with a high-powered round, the sound should have reflected sharply off concrete and brick. It did not. The only condition that fit the audio profile was a suppressed shot from elevation, possibly airborne. It was then that one of the slowed frames revealed a small hovering object above the eastern corner of the plaza. A drone. It hovered at an altitude consistent with the angle of entry. Its position, relative to the entry wound, fit the path of the projectile. This moment shifted the scope of inquiry. The possibility of an aerial firing platform replaced the rooftop sniper theory. Additional frames showed no movement from that drone after the shot until several seconds later. Later analysis of flight activity in the area recorded an aircraft operating without a transponder at approximately the same time. Radar logs showed brief, unregistered traffic near the event's coordinates. Though not identified, the altitude and silence aligned with small-scale tactical UAV operations. No FAA warning had been issued prior to the event. The aircraft did not reappear on radar after the incident. A new hypothesis emerged. The drone had not only delivered the shot, but potentially deployed or planted the weapon later discovered in the woods. This explained the rifle's pristine condition and its intact assembly. A drone flight to a wooded drop zone could account for both the placement and the wrapping of the weapon without human handling. It would also explain the lack of physical transfer evidence connecting the suspect to the firearm. Forensic backtracking on time codes revealed no window for the suspect to perform all required actions within the available time span. From the last visual of the suspect on the roof to his descent, the margin was insufficient for weapon handling, disassembly, or evasion. Every movement was tracked. No concealment occurred. By day 3, it was evident that the trajectory, sound profile, and rifle recovery narrative did not align. The drone, initially unnoticed, became central to explaining the ballistic path. Morningstar's team issued a summary noting that the wound vector, if measured from the point of entry to exit, intersected precisely with the drone's recorded location during the frame-by-frame collapse of the subject. The conclusion was reached not through speculation, but by eliminating every incompatible variable. What began as a standard sniper theory collapsed under forensic pressure. The rifle was planted. The angle was too steep. The suspect was never armed. The weapon arrived at its location through a method not accounted for by official statements. Each data point pointed to an aerial platform. The press did not report this. The official agencies did not acknowledge it. But the evidence, processed independently, showed a precision strike delivered from above and the rifle transported separately. The narrative was flawed, and the pattern of avoidance had begun to show. In the days that followed, no agency amended their statements. The FBI remained committed to the rooftop shooter theory despite the trajectory contradiction, the absence of the rifle on the suspect, and the presence of the drone in the frame. No clarification came regarding the origin of the firearm. No forensic path analysis was publicly released. The media, briefed by law enforcement sources, continued to reinforce the original story. Tyler Robinson, rooftop, long-range shot, political motive. But the drone footage couldn't be ignored. Its position, left and above the victim, aligned within a narrow margin of error to the documented wound path. It hovered precisely over the vector calculated from wound geometry. Morningstar's team submitted a pathline model overlaying the drone's position, the entry wound, and the exit channel. The match was too precise to disregard. A fixed-wing aircraft could not maintain that hover. Only a quad-rotor or stabilized UAV could. Based on size, apparent altitude, and visible structure, the drone was estimated to be a custom mid-class build, likely GPS-guided with precision gimbal targeting. The theory that it was also the rifle drop vehicle gained weight. Drone payload tests conducted in parallel with this analysis showed that a rifle of the Mauser's dimensions could be carried by several known commercial-grade aerial platforms. Using standard rigging, a drop mechanism could release the weapon with minimal impact. The wrapping could serve as both concealment and shock buffer. Video timeline markers were revisited. A second drone-shaped object was visible in a separate frame, this time further north, after the shooting, but before the rifle was discovered. That flight path aligned with the later discovery zone. No attempt was made by federal agencies to verify this sighting. No public inquiry was issued regarding unregistered drone activity that day. FAA logs were not updated. The aircraft operating without transponder signal, captured briefly by local radar, was never acknowledged beyond initial internal tracking. These omissions marked a shift in the investigation, not toward resolution, but containment. Key footage was left out of news recasts. Analysts from mainstream outlets dismissed the drone angle without forensic rebuttal. Narrative discipline took priority over evidentiary clarity. This selective blindness raised deeper concerns, not about the crime, but about the response. The drone, the bullet path, the planted rifle, each one represented a data point. Together, they formed a forensic chain. But that chain wasn't followed by the institutions assigned to investigate. That failure wasn't technical. It was institutional. A refusal to confront evidence that contradicted the already issued storyline. And that refusal functioned as a diagnostic, a live test of system integrity. Because if an agency is shown video of a drone supplied with forensic vectors that disprove the official shot angle, presented with a suspect lacking any evidence of possession or transport of the weapon, and still proceeds to prosecute the original claim, what does that say about their operational objectivity? This was not a theoretical failure. It was a practical one. An airborne shot was carried out in a crowded public space. The weapon was removed from the scene by unmanned systems. Evidence was planted to construct an alternate explanation. And when the truth emerged in open source video, it was ignored. That is the moment the investigation itself became part of the story. Not as a solution, but as a symptom. Because it demonstrated that the very institutions trusted to uncover the facts had instead chosen to protect the framework, the false narrative, the convenient explanation. And that protection extended beyond the FBI. The Department of Justice issued no correction. The media adjusted no timeline. Every actor moved in coordination to preserve a collapsing premise. That's not evidence of incompetence. That's evidence of orchestration. The pattern had emerged before, in prior cases where truth surfaced too quickly, too cleanly, and was shut down under the weight of official repetition. But in this case, the margin was too narrow, the footage too clear, the wound too measurable, the weapon too absent, and now the pressure too high to suppress the questions. This event exposed a chain of denial that moved from the scene to the screen, from physical evidence to media output, from drone frame to primetime framing, and the one institution responsible for stopping that chain failed. The system failed, not because it couldn't solve the crime, but because it chose not to. By the fourth day, no correction had been issued, no new footage acknowledged. No official questioned why the suspect carried no weapon, yet the rifle was somehow located, fully assembled, in a wooded area he was never seen entering. The drone, which had now been independently verified in at least 3 public recordings, remained unmentioned in all federal briefings. That absence was no longer explainable by oversight. It had become proof of deliberate omission. The analysis deepened. Using enhanced path tracing, Morningstar's team reconstructed the likely ballistic arc from the drone's visible hover point to the entry wound on the subject. At the drone's estimated altitude, with the reported bullet caliber, the downward strike fit within 3.6 degrees of the recorded tissue damage path. The neck exit was consistent with a right behind ear penetration angle, following a sharp lateral to left downward curve. This could not have been achieved from a fixed rooftop. The forensic model eliminated all stationary structures within the visible event space. Only a moving platform above and left of stage center matched the evidence. This conclusion carried implications beyond forensics. It meant that the rifle recovered in the woods was not merely an outlier, it was a decoy. Its discovery, in pristine condition, bore none of the characteristics of a rifle hastily discarded by a fleeing suspect. The lack of fragmentation, wear, or environmental exposure pointed to careful placement. If it had been dropped by a drone, as the payload pattern suggested, its wrapping and full assembly made tactical sense. A clean drop, fully functional, no traceable prints, no heat signature upon retrieval. Yet the suspect remained the focal point, despite the total lack of footage showing him with the rifle, and a failure to account for how he could have transported, reassembled, and abandoned it, all within a timeline that allowed no such activity. His name remained central in every media outlet. This fixation served a purpose. By focusing public attention on the human element, the story could maintain emotional traction. The complexity of a drone-assisted attack would demand a reevaluation not only of this incident, but of operational security standards nationally. Instead, the false narrative continued, uninterrupted. This was the turning point. The moment when the story was no longer about one event or one suspect. It was about institutional reflex. The reflex to preserve authority, to protect appearance over reality. The FBI's silence was not neutral. It was active participation in a misdirection. The agency had access to the same video data. It possessed the capacity for 3D forensic modeling, thermal imaging overlays, and radar echo mapping. Its failure to act on clear contradictions was not due to technological limitation. It was a decision. And in that decision lay the deepest revelation. The Bureau had not changed. Despite past scrutiny, despite claims of reform, the institution responded to this critical failure of narrative, not by correcting course, but by locking it in. No press statement acknowledged the drone. No forensic expert from inside the agency challenged the angle of entry. Instead, the rifle was held up as proof, despite no footage linking it to the event. This failure spread outward. Newsrooms that had access to the same materials repeated the official account with precision. Anchor scripts reflected FBI press briefings verbatim. Headlines framed the event as a political act by a radicalized lone wolf. Not a single major outlet questioned how a suspect could have carried a long rifle undetected, fired from a building that contradicted the bullet path, and then discarded a clean weapon in a forest he never entered. What this revealed was more than complicity. It was systemic obedience. The press did not investigate, it disseminated. The agencies did not analyze, they selected. And the selection process favored the story that would cause the least institutional disturbance, not the one that best aligned with observable facts. By the end of the first week, the real story had been constructed piece by piece. A drone, captured in multiple video angles, seen hovering in perfect alignment with the victim's wounds. A bullet trajectory that ruled out every building in the vicinity. A sound signature consistent only with a downward elevated shot. A rifle that appeared without transport or contact. A suspect whose timeline and possessions failed to link him to the act. And an investigative apparatus that chose to ignore all of it. This was no longer a question of crime scene analysis. It had become a demonstration. A clear, replicable, time-stamped breakdown of how narrative control overrides forensic reality. And in that demonstration, the FBI failed, not through inaction, but by actively preserving a false conclusion in the face of contradictory evidence. The chain of authority that issued those conclusions exposed itself, not just to error, but to intent. This is not like 9/11. That event unfolded across layers of chaos and confusion, where data streams collapsed under their own weight, and where key pieces of evidence were either lost, redacted, or buried under national security justifications. In contrast, what unfolded here was small in scale, but exact in execution. A targeted, singular event caught on high-resolution cameras from multiple angles in a public place, under bright daylight, and with minimal variables. There was no fog of war, no missing black boxes, no controlled demolition theories to obscure the raw facts. This wasn't clouded by decades of geopolitical buildup. This was direct, simple. One target, one shot, one timeline, and every piece of real evidence contradicts the story we were given. That simplicity is what makes this different. That clarity is what makes this dangerous to those who rely on confusion to operate. The moment the truth emerged, it wasn't questioned by the institution. It was ignored, deliberately. The drone footage was visible, the shot angle was measurable, the suspect's movements were traceable, and the anomalies were not complex to understand. A first-year cadet at Quantico could see that the angle didn't match the rooftop. A freshman journalism student could observe that the rifle wasn't on the suspect. And any reasonable investigator, given 10 minutes and an aerial map, could rule out the official version of events. Yet it was not ruled out. It was reinforced, amplified, federally endorsed. And that brings us to the accomplices. Because to maintain a lie of this precision, someone has to do more than simply remain silent. Someone has to write the briefings. Someone has to coordinate the press releases. Someone has to stand in front of a podium, call a suspect by name, and hold up a piece of planted evidence as if it were conclusive. That is not error. That is orchestration. Every element of the official response became part of the lie. The timing of the press statement, the location of the discovered rifle, the slow motion release of suspect photos, the missing drone acknowledgement, the lack of sound analysis, the refusal to explain trajectory discrepancy. This wasn't one person getting it wrong. This was a distributed pattern of suppression, and it traces directly back to command structure. Inside the FBI, someone decided that the truth of an aerial drone-assisted assassination was more dangerous than the lie of a lone gunman. That someone handed down a narrative. That someone authorized ignoring the very evidence their own labs were capable of analyzing. That chain of command, from agents to supervisors to briefers to department heads, became complicit not in a mistake, but in a deception. And through that deception, they implicated themselves. This is the swamp we were promised would be drained. Not just corruption of money, but corruption of truth. Not just institutional failure, but institutional protection of failure. The moment the facts were clear and the story was not corrected, the system revealed itself. And the revelation was total. From the top floor of the Hoover building to the newsrooms running the copy, the chain was unbroken. The pipeline of falsehood ran clean, uninterrupted, and fast. This moment is a pivot point because unlike 9/11, this is not buried in classified files. It's not hidden behind decades of secrecy. The evidence is public. The footage is common. The physics is simple. The facts are present. The lie is visible. And for the first time in a generation, the lie can be traced, step by step, back through every node of power that sustained it. If this exposure reaches the public mind, if it breaks through the narrative firewall, it will not just collapse a case. It will shatter the trust scaffold that protects corrupted authority. It will show in full daylight that federal law enforcement not only failed to find the truth, it ran from it. And in doing so, it chose sides. This can be the moment we prove what many suspected but could not demonstrate, that the rot is not hypothetical, that the machinery of justice can be bent to protect itself, that when a truth threatens power, even death can be repackaged to preserve the lie. But not this time, not with this clarity, not with this trail of evidence, not with this generation watching. If this story is told, fully told, the swamp doesn't survive it, it burns.